Okay, so this is like the second part of the lecture on historical Texas, or the part of the prologue. And so we're going to get into more recent stuff. And I know y'all were not even born at this time, and I realize that, but more recent stuff. Okay, we're still looking at the same learning objectives, what makes us different from other states, what contributes to Texas pride, etc., and looking at the political adjustments. All right, so let's talk about the 1970s. You know, uh, in 2007, 2008, we went through the Great Recession, and that was where there were a lot of issues with banking and a lot of issues with the way the banks were configuring the different types of stocks and bonds, that type of thing. And they were saying these places are too big to fail, and that kind of led to a recession and to a lot of bailout. Okay, we're kind of going through that again right now, but that's neither here nor there. All right, so this kind of happened in the 1970s also. There were insurance and banking scandals, and it was happening here in the state of Texas, and it was happening in Dallas, basically the financial institutions in Dallas. And so at that time, it was Governor Preston Smith and the Lieutenant Governor were found to be not guilty. But the Speaker of the House and others were convicted of conspiracy to accept a bribe. So, as I said, there was just still a lot of corruption that was going on, even back in the 1970s, which is more, current than the 40s or the 30s or the 20s or the 1800s, but it was still going on. Okay, some of the notable things in the 1970s is that Dolph Briscoe was elected the governor, and so at that time he tried to get us tried to get a new Texas Constitution passed because the one that we're still using is from 1876, and he said, well, the thing is that we the Texas Constitution that we are using today does not really meet the needs of the people of Texas today. I mean, he was absolutely right. But the thing is, it takes so much to get a new constitution. It takes like two-thirds of each of the chambers, two-thirds of the legislature, and then we need to go ahead and vote it in. But he could never get that super majority that he needed in order to get it done. He also tried to get Texas to become a right to work state. And so the way Texas is right now is that we are an at will state. So basically, that's saying if that you are hired by somebody, you can be fired, let go, furloughed, laid off. I mean, they use many different terms of or whatever, but you really don't have any kind of recourse to that unless you go to some of the civil rights provisions or the affirmative action provisions, which basically says there are some protected classes. And those protected classes are like, if you've ever worked, there's a little paragraph at the bottom that says we do not discriminate against race, color, creed, national origin, that type of thing. So certain groups are already protected. Other groups, because of the affirmative action, are also protected. And so they're saying if your job is terminated, for whatever reason, and you think that you have cause, and that cause is based on discrimination, whether it be, I'm a woman, I'm fired by a male, is it sexual discrimination or gender discrimination? It could be, well, that was an Anglo, I'm Hispanic. Is it racial discrimination? Well, that's a 20-year-old, I'm a 50 plus year old. Is that ageism? So there's just different groups that are protected that you might have some remedy. You might have some remedy and be able to file a wrongful termination. But anyway, so that's an at-will state. A right-to-work state says you have the right and you have protections. Well, that one failed because again, you need to have two-thirds of each of the chambers of the legislature, and then you need to have us voted in. So it just did not pass. Okay, Briscoe was also a Democrat. Then comes William P. Clements. And William P. Clements was the first Republican governor that had been elected since, listen to this, 1874. 1874. And so he received the support from the conservative Democrats to be elected as governor of the state of Texas. And he served two terms, not consecutively. He served this one, and then he served after, like one other one after that. Okay, in the meantime, the one that was elected in right after the Republican Clements was this guy named Mark White. And he was elected governor and he ran on a platform of educational reform. And I know y'all were not born at this time, but the issues that he passed, the laws that he got passed during his administration actually have impacted you. And I'll tell you how. The first thing that he did is he said, well, in the state of Texas, we think that teachers make a very low salary. And back at that time, guys, teachers were making somewhere like 13, 14, $15,000 a year, and that wasn't very much. And so what he said is, we're going to go ahead and increase the teacher salaries to be more in line with what other the teachers from other states make. So he managed to get that done. There were issues in the way that Texas finances its school districts. The issues have not completely been resolved. There have been band-aid approaches, but it's basically saying it was a lawsuit out of San Antonio, and it was a school district in San Antonio comes from a very poor area of town. They were saying we do not have appropriate or enough money to be able to give these kids a good education. And education is kind of like the answer to get out of a bad situation, right? If you want upward mobility, whether it be social mobility or economic mobility, education really is the key. They're saying, these kids are starting from a place that's below the average, and they're not going to be able to get ahead if they don't get a better education. So they instituted this thing called the Robin Hood Plan. I'll talk more about where it is now when I get towards the end of this lecture. But basically what it's saying is that they're going to take money from the more affluent school districts, and they're going to be funneling it to the poor school districts. And that's why they call it the Robin Hood Plan. Now, the one that you're more familiar with is the no pass, no play. So basically, it says, hey, man, if you are failing a course, you cannot participate in any extracurricular activities, particularly sports, for 6 weeks. At that time, it was 6 weeks. I think it's changed. I think the school districts have more discretion now, but at that time, it was for 6 weeks. But this was the big one here. Mark White said, well, if teachers are going to be making higher salaries, they need to be licensed or certified. I think that's the word that they use. Say you need to be certified to teach. And so they must pass a competency test. Now, I don't remember what it is now. It's gone through so many different revisions of what it's called, but basically it says this. If you're going to teach in the state of Texas, you have to be credentialed. That's what it says. You have to have the credentials. I have to have credentials. I have to be credentialed, but I have a PhD, so that's why I'm credentialed. But anyway, so they're saying, you come out of college, yes, you do go through the student teaching, but you have to pass an exam saying that you have the credentials to teach. Well, the teachers did not like this at all because they said, coming out with a bachelor's degree, we should not have to pass a competency test. And so the argument was this. They said, well, you know what? If you have a law degree, you go to school for 3 years, but you have to pass the bar before you can practice. If you go to medical school, that's 4 years. Yes, you have an MD degree, but you can't practice unless you pass the boards. Okay, well, it's the same thing. If you want to be considered to be a professional, you also have to pass some type of a competency test. So kind of like that's where it is now. That's where it stayed. The teachers were very angry. They said, we're not going to elect this guy again, so they voted for Clements, and he was elected again. The Republican, okay, so it was Republican, Democrat, Republican. Okay, 1990s. Yay, y'all were finally born. You were born in a different era than a lot of people, and that's why y'all are probably more tolerant than a lot of people. And it was a more diverse election because Ann Richards was the second female governor that was elected in the state of Texas. We also had our first Hispanic Attorney General. AG stands for Attorney General that was elected because these are elected positions. Okay, first avowed homosexual in the Texas legislature, and he actually came out as being gay. And you're saying now, well, what's the big deal about that? No, but back then it was a big deal. Believe me, it was a big deal. I don't know who it was. The book never said, but somebody kind of fessed up. They came out. They came out. Now it's no big deal. Okay, 1992, Kay Bailey Hutchinson was our first female U.S. senator that we voted in, and she goes to Washington, D.C. And so for the first time, this was a political adjustment here. For the first time, we have two Republicans in Congress. And so it has been this way since the 1990s, early 1990s, because all of a sudden there were starting to be more political adjustments taking place. And where Texas is starting to become more of a one-party dominant state, and that party is the Republican Party. So let's talk about that. Okay, so the legacy is that the Texas did become a two-party state. okay, so there's the Democrats and then there's Republicans. More Republicans are getting elected into office because before it was Democrat, Democrat, Democrat. 1994, George W. Bush, the Republican, was elected as a governor. In 1996, the Republicans won the majority of seats in the Texas legislature. So all the seats that were, up for election, the Republican Party is the one that won those seats. Okay, so this is already saying we're kind of starting to see the shift. We're starting to see the shift, that political adjustment, that political alignment or de-alignment or realignment. And we'll talk about those terms when I talk about the parties. By 1998, every statewide elected office, and we'll talk about the plural executive when we talk about the governor, all of those offices were that were up for election, the Republicans were elected. They win every statewide office. 1999, the Democrats still control the House of Representatives. HR stands for the House of Representatives, but they were getting ready to lose it. So that was 1999. And so it's every 2 years, every 2 years. Then we get to the 2000s. All right, in 2000, George W. Bush, that's W. George W. Bush is elected president, and so he goes to the White House. And so Rick Perry was the lieutenant governor at that time, and I know a lot of these terms don't mean a lot of them. It's like the second command in the state of Texas, or that's the line of succession. So Rick Perry becomes the governor when George W. Bush goes to Washington, D.C., because he was elected as the president. Okay, then in 2002, the term was up where we needed to have other elections or governor elections, gubernatorial elections. So Perry ran on his own, and there was this guy named Sanchez, Tony Sanchez, and he was the first Hispanic candidate to ever run. He was not really a very strong candidate because he was not a politician. He was a banker. I mean, he was a rich Latino, a rich Hispanic. He was a businessman. He had no idea how to campaign. He didn't know how to, bring people in and get them excited about what he wanted to talk about or whatever. But anyway, so so Perry was elected governor, on his own, and Perry served like 16 years as governor of the state of Texas. 2002, this is a red letter year, guys, red letter year. This is when both chambers of the Texas legislature became completely and dominantly Republican, the majority Republican. So we have a Republican Democrat, I'm sorry, a Republican governor, a Republican legislature. And so that's known as a unified government. And so this is saying Texas, the question is, has Texas really become more conservative, or why is it that the Republicans are getting elected into office? So, I mean, there's different reasons why this happened. A lot of times, as I always tell students, it depends on who comes out to vote, and we'll talk about that when we talk about political parties. In 2003, okay, well, let me back up a second. Every 10 years, we have a census, and so one of the uses of the census is to redistrict and to draw the lines in different ways. And so the way that the parties draw the lines or the legislatures draw the lines, it's going to probably benefit one party more so than another party, and that's called gerrymandering. So there was an issue about the Democrats running away because they were saying the Republican Party just wants to draw the lines to benefit the Republican Party. And so, they had these group of Democrats that would just, leave the state so that they could not meet to pass this or to draw the lines for from this particular census. Eventually, they did have to do it. The lines were drawn. The Republican Party did benefit from it. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about districting and redistricting, when we talk about the legislature. Okay, I talked about the Robin Hood plan with Mark White and about equalizing the funding, taking from the rich school districts, the more affluent school districts, and sending them to the poor school districts. All right, that continues to be a problem. And it continues to be a problem because it's gone to the courts so many times, and they're always saying the same thing. Texas, you can't do that. You have to find another way to do that. And so it went to the Texas Supreme Court, and the Texas Supreme Court basically said this. Well, Texas doesn't say that you have to have a good education. It just says that you have to have an education. So there you go. So there you go. So there's been Band-Aid fixes. I'll talk about those in just a little bit. So that issue has really never been resolved. Okay, 2007, Democrats gained some seats in the Texas Senate and House, but the Republicans are still in the majority. They continue to be in the majority. 2017, there was a law that was passed. Okay, the law was passed about the voter ID, or the need to show some type of voter ID in addition to your voter registration card. It passed in 2007, but it wasn't really, and it didn't go. It was defeated. Then it was passed again in 2011, but it took several years to actually get it implemented because again, it went to court, whether or not this was going to be constitutional. Did it impede somebody from voting? And so they had different agreements, let's put it that way, of how this voter ID legislation was going to work. But basically it says this, and this remains true in the state of Texas. When you go vote, you cannot just show them your voter ID. You also have to show them a type of picture ID. They've included many more than they originally had, saying you can only do 2 or 3 different types of ID. I mean, even the military ID wasn't not going to be accepted. Now it's accepted. So they just had to make a lot of adjustments, a lot of amendments to this piece of legislation. In 2010, Rick Perry was still the governor, and so what he did is he said, we have a problem with education in the state of Texas. We have this thing called the No Child Left Behind Act. We're going to talk more about that act whenever I talk about American federalism. But he's saying we do not see that the students are doing any better under this No Child Left Behind Act because they're this particular way that students are being assessed, these standardized tests that they have to take. It's not really preparing them for college level work. It's not really preparing them for the workforce. We're not exactly sure what it's preparing them to do. So at that time, Rick Perry said, we're not going to accept the federal money because that means that we have to go ahead and adhere to your guidelines. Texas wants to do something different. We're going to go to the STAR exams, and that's probably the one that y'all graduated in. If you graduated recently, like since 2010, it was the STAR exam. I've heard different things from different students saying it's really hard, it was really easy, so I'm not exactly sure. Okay, in 2011, there was this one faction of the Republican Party called the Tea Party, and the Tea Party is still there, but it goes by a different name now. Now it's called the what is it called? The Freedom Caucus. That's what it's called. But anyway, so it's like the more conservative part of the Republican Party. So they came in and they started, with a very conservative agenda, very conservative ideology. And so they were saying, okay, well, from the 2010 census, because we had another census, we're going to go ahead and redraw the districts. And they redrew the districts to benefit the Republican Party and to benefit the Tea Party candidates, which at that time were being called the Tea Party candidates. So this particular redrawing of the districts, it only happens every 10 years. So by 2014, the Republican Party continued to dominate, and there's like basically 2 reasons. One, of the way that the district lines were drawn, and secondly, because of the party organization, it's much more organized, and they really do get the Republican constituents out to go vote. Okay, 2015, campus carry legislation was passed, and y'all are going to be doing writing up a short paper on the campus carry. That's like later on, but it was passed saying that yes, you can conceal carry, but you cannot open carry. In 2015, they talk a lot about the Dreamers. I don't know if you've heard that term or not, but they're talking about it at the national level. It's immigration policy, and these are people that came in as children and they went through the school district, and that they do not have any kind of court record or juvenile record or felony record. That basically they're clean of any kind of crimes. That there's like probably about 21 conditions that they have to adhere to be considered a dreamer and to get that criteria qualification as a dreamer. Okay, Texas also has a Texas Dream Act, and so for this, what this is saying is that if you came in as a child in the state of Texas, and if you go to a Texas high school, you can go to college when the universities, well, saying that you can get in, but this is why it's done. It says you do not have to pay international tuition. You can pay state level tuition. Now, the biggest difference between the National Dream Act and the Texas Dream Act is that the National Dream Act, or the Immigration Dream Act, gives them the right to be able to work, the visa to be able to work. The Texas Dream Act does not. Okay, so 2017, this is the Freedom Caucus. It was the old Tea Party. Okay, so the Freedom Caucus kind of emerged. They kind of brought in a lot of the more conservative wing, not only the Tea Party, but a lot of the other conservatives, and they became a dominant force in the Texas legislature in 2017. Uh, they would try to get a gender bathroom bill passed, and so basically, this gender bathroom bill basically says it's talking about the trans. They're saying if you are, transitioning or from one gender to another, transgendering from one to another, you have to go to the bathroom of your original gender. But anyway, so it passed, and the businesses were really against it because they were saying, well, it's going to kill business. It's going to kill business. Why are y'all doing this? Why are y'all doing this? But anyway, so it really did not have much support other than that in a very, very conservative wing of the party. And our lieutenant governor that we have right now is the one that was really pushing for that. That was his main agenda item, but he was not able to get it through. Okay, 2018, the students were so energized by Beto O'Rourke running and challenging Ted Cruz for the U.S. Senate. So I think like the best part about his run, I mean, Beto did not, I mean, he was not elected. I mean, he fell short. I mean, and not by much, but he did feel short. But it's shifted, it signaled another political alignment that I see is going to be going on. Okay, all of a sudden, the younger generation is more energized. The younger generation tends to be more progressive. The younger generation wants to get involved. So I see that there's going to be a shift and a political adjustment coming in the state of Texas. I don't know how soon it's coming, but I kind of see that it is coming. But anyway, so Cruz did win the election, but again, not by much, by 2.6% of the vote. In 2018, some congressional seats did flip to the Democratic Party, but the Republican Party in the state of Texas continues to dominate. So we shall see how it goes.